To start this presentation, I want to present a personal account from bushfire season, which happened in Australia earlier this year. I will focus on one particular day, which was around middle to late January. By January, the bushfire season was well and truly underway, and the fires have been burning for quite a long time. But obviously living in a city, you feel kind of like away from it, because there's not like a fire on your doorstep. Although there is this sort of feeling in the air that anything could catch a light at any time. So you feel on alert. I think that's the best word. There's this sense of sort of alarm or alert that has been stirred up by a sort of mass consumption of news media and social media. By this time, though, these sources are becoming less and less trustworthy or authentic. There's been a disinformation sort of campaign suggesting that the reason that the bushfires are out of control is because of the actual Greens Party advocating for less controlled burnings. This 3D rendering here was one of the many images that was circulating that it was eventually accused of mis or disinformation or carrying disinformation about the Australian bushfires. In actual truth, it was just sort of like a 3D render made by a hobbyist who was into sort of 3D rendering effects and things like that, and it was based loosely on factual data and satellite data to get the shape of the land and things like that. But it was called a photograph, and it was circulated as such, and therefore it was accused of harboring misinformation. There were much more damaging memes that were circulated that were deliberately out to discredit or feed or just disrupt the information people were getting about the bushfires. I think this is where TJ Denos starts to touch on the sort of culture around these sort of images when he talks when they start talking about the pyrocene and petrocapitalism. Naomi Klein identified orchestrated raids on the public sphere in the wake of catastrophic events and the treatment of disasters as marketing opportunities back in 2007 when she labelled this activity disaster capitalism. And this is still evident in this misinformation around the bushfires that was calling for further controlled burns and land clearing. Controlled burnings I always associate with this colonial idea of clearing the land in order to take ownership of it. So there's a story of this family called the McAfees who settled on an island outside of Melbourne called Phillip Island, which is actually where my family had a legacy of taking holidays there for decades and decades, and now my auntie and my mother both live there. But the story that is becoming more and more clear, although it would have been covered up or reframed previously, is that at some point they set fire to the whole island in order to clear it so they could claim ownership of the land, so that the whole island was set alight. So land clearing is not the same as controlled burning. At the same time, there'd been this push, as there is always, to find like a specific hero image for what was going on. So it got to the point where the New York Times located a photographer in Australia, and he took this picture that you've probably seen of the house on fire with the kangaroo silhouetted in the front and a few straggly plants in the front. So what you see here is the result of a very quick Google search for Australian bushfire images. The New York Times was almost explicit in the fact that they wanted to find an iconic image or a hero image that could signify the bushfires and be passed around and become like this one true image of the event. They even wrote an article called "In One Photo Capturing the Devastation of Australia's Fires," where they explained that they found a photographer who was in Australia at the time called Matthew Abbott and commissioned him to go find the iconic image that would represent this one event. And I feel like this is the sort of thing that Demos acknowledges when they write about the insufficiency of images in catastrophic or, pyrocenic events. And I feel like an extension of that is to say that burning aesthetics are also burnt. They are turned to ashes. Their duration is always limited, even in repetition. So even though this image has been churned and churned and churned, it's now starting to dissipate already. We burn through burning images. They do not last. They are like the things they represent. And instead I found myself just going outside and looking for evidence. Things that I could see with the skin of my eye. And sometimes I would photograph these and share them. So there's one particular evening when I was surveying the sky, because people would talk about the sky and how it was changing. And this particular night was ominous because it was hot, but it was very cloudy. And the clouds were sort of this purpley, orangey, pinky colour. Like they looked heavy, but they also looked sort of bright, weird bright colour. And I took a photo of this and I shared it on Instagram. Then the next day, the report was saying that it was going to be like 40 degrees. If it was going to be like a really hot day, I would just shut up everything and pretty much entomb myself in the house until the heat had passed. So I was preparing to do that. And as I was sort of pulling down blinds and shutting doors, I stepped out into the front yard. And recently the surface had been waterproofed with this pale blue, rubbery looking substance. It was really bright. It was like the bottom of a swimming pool. And this fine layer of red dust had pretty much settled on everything you could see. Just this really fine layer of dust. The ground was now this sort of weird, mottly, orangey blue colour. And I took a photo of it. But I didn't take it because I wanted to show anyone. And I didn't even take it because I wanted to look at it later. This image you shouldn't be able to see because I didn't take it for you. I didn't even take it for me to look at. I didn't take it for Instagram. I had no intention of sharing it. For some reason, it was important to my survival. I don't know what it was going to signify for me. I don't know how it was going to help me survive, but it just needed to be seen, firstly by me, but then secondly by my phone and my camera, and be recorded. I will keep it. I probably don't need to look at it again. I mean, it's not particularly aesthetically appealing. It doesn't really tell you a lot. Well, it doesn't tell anyone who doesn't know why the image was taken a lot. But also, I don't feel compelled to explain it. I think the events around it were explanation enough. I wasn't the only one that I realised was taking these or using sort of abstracted images that were not very literal to just pinpoint what was going on or to try and reference what was going on. This is an image that was posted to Instagram by an artist who lived locally but has an extensive practice around Australia and outside of Australia. And to talk about the things that were happening at the same time, he chose an image from not even from the same year. Like, this is an image from 2009 that he was using to talk about events that happened only this year. And I feel like this is when we talk about dirty images, there is a sort of durational aspect which really voids a lot of the discussion around dirty images. When you think of fire, you think of acceleration. It was in 1991 that Douglas Copeland launched his career-defining novel Generation X with the subtitle Tales of an Accelerated Culture. And the very essence of acceleration suggests that there's a continuum where more and more information and lived experience is compressed into shorter and shorter time frames or durations. And like through just this one lens from 1991, dirty pictures appear outmoded and slow. They're just too slow to be able to accurately describe the catastrophe or the disasters or the events that are going on, and that the definition of dirty pictures probably needs to be expanded if it is to have potency. Because even discussing dirty images, the author gets seduced by staring at the chromatic potential of hydrocarbon atoms producing rainbow-like effects. That's devoid of urgency. There's no urgency there at all. It's just gone. So like you could expand on the idea of dirty pictures by looking at like tools that are inherent to image making, such as before and after pictures, or after images, or images within sequences that give it a sense of duration, of urgency, of an event that is escalating or accelerating. Possibly when you're facing an accelerated catastrophe, you're not going to have time to share it. It's not going to form part of a thesis. It's not going to provide some sort of activism. It's not going to do anything other than confirm what is happening in front of you. And that, I think, is the catastrophic image that the text we've read are leading to.